The night before my granddaughter's party, my phone buzzed under the harsh glow of the kitchen light. Don't ruin it tomorrow. Keep quiet. I'm Clifton, 57, a retired plant controller, staring at the cold coffee beside Vera's old watch, ticking steady on my desk. Ever been told to disappear when you're the one keeping the lights on? The phone lit up on my kitchen counter, its pale glow washing over the laminate like a bad omen. The screen showed Sable's name, and beneath it a message that looked more like a warning than an invitation. Don't ruin it tomorrow. Keep quiet. No greeting, no thank you, no hint of warmth. Just 7 words that made the small apartment around me feel even smaller. I picked up the phone, stared at the message, and then set it back down beside my cold cup of coffee. The bitter smell of it hung in the air, mixed with the faint scent of rain drifting through the cracked kitchen window. For a long moment, I just listened to the faint echo of the church bells somewhere downtown, tolling the hour as if to remind me that tomorrow was coming, whether I was ready or not. I slid my chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the linoleum, and turned to my laptop. The bluish glow made the room look like a waiting room at some late-night clinic. My inbox was open to a confirmation email from the caterer, long strings of numbers, totals, and deposits that felt cold and impersonal. 4 digits for the food, another 3 for the rentals deposits I'd made weeks ago, without so much as a thank you. My eyes traced the lines like I used to study audit sheets back when I still wore a suit every day. The routine of double-checking was a comfort even now. At least numbers never lied, even when people did. I tapped the space bar, letting the screen dim to black, and rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit of a long day. Beside the laptop sat the folder. I didn't need to open it. I knew what was inside by heart. Receipts for the house repairs, the caterer, the tent rental, even the balloons Sable had insisted on. I reached out and brushed the top with my fingertips, smoothing the sharp corners the way I might have once smoothed down a wrinkle on Vera's blouse before a Sunday service. The folder felt heavier than it should, not because of the paper, but because of what it meant. Beneath my wrist, Vera's watch ticked steadily, a faint reminder of steadier times. She had given it to me on our 20th anniversary, a simple silver face with a leather band that had grown soft and cracked with the years. The tick was soft, but tonight every click seemed to echo in the stillness, as if Vera herself was telling me to breathe, to think. Before I spoke, to remember the patience that had gotten me through worse than this. I leaned back in my chair and glanced toward the living room. The shadows of my furniture stretched long in the amber light from a single lamp. This 2-bedroom apartment had been a downgrade when I sold our family home in 2019, a concession to a life I hadn't chosen. The walls carried no photos except for one of Vera smiling by the lake. On a windy day, her hair caught mid-whip across her face. I caught myself staring at her eyes, searching for advice she could no longer give. The memory of her voice played faintly in my head, not as clear as it once was, but enough to steady the knot twisting in my gut. Stay calm, Clifton. Don't let them see you crack. The air was warm, sticky, in the way only early summer in South Carolina could manage. I stood stretching the stiffness out of my back and walked over to the small hall mirror. My reflection looked older than 55 tonight. The crow's feet cut deeper around my eyes, my jawline had softened, and the gray in my hair seemed to glow under the weak light. I tugged my jacket from its hook, slipping it on and tugging the lapels straight. The navy fabric hung well enough, but no amount of brushing could hide that it had been through more church gatherings and memorials than parties these last few years. I buttoned the middle clasp and practiced a smile, the kind that would pass for genuine if I didn't hold it too long. Tomorrow I'd need it. Sable didn't like long faces unless, of course, they were hers. On the counter, the folder lay open just enough for a sliver of the invoices to peek out. I walked over and lifted it, tucking it beneath my arm, like a briefcase I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. The leather band of Vera's watch pressed lightly against the paper, a strange pairing of the past and the present. I slid the folder into the inner pocket of my jacket, feeling how it altered the way the fabric hung. It was more than paper. It was leverage, a silent assurance that I wasn't as powerless as they thought. The weight of it pressed against my ribs like a secret weapon, not meant for use unless things got ugly. I walked back to the window and looked out over the street. The sky was the color of slate, the kind of twilight that never seems to end in small southern towns. Porch lights flickered on across the road one by one like sentries taking their posts. Somewhere a dog barked and then fell silent. I breathed in the warm, damp air, letting it fill my lungs until the tightness in my chest eased. The apartment around me was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the ticking of Vera's watch. I let those sounds anchor me while my mind wandered ahead to tomorrow, how the yard would smell like hickory smoke, how Sable would float through her circle of friends, and how I'd sit in the corner like some relic everyone forgot to pack away. I closed the window and pulled the blinds shut. The room darkened, the glow from the laptop still faint against the wall. I reached over and shut it down, watching the screen fade to black until my own reflection looked back. For a moment, I saw Vera behind me, imagined or remembered, smiling faintly, as if to say, "You're tougher than you feel right now." I exhaled, picked up my jacket, and slipped my arms through the sleeves. The folder's edge poked against my side as I adjusted the lapel. I ran a hand over the spot and felt the crisp paper beneath a reminder of the line. I was willing to cross if they pushed me far enough. "If tomorrow turns ugly," I muttered into the quiet, my voice barely louder than the tick of the watch. "They'll remember who's holding the strings." Then I clicked off the lamp, letting the apartment fall into darkness, and stood there a moment longer, listening to the night and the soft, steady heartbeat of Vera's gift against my wrist. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a heavy mix of hickory smoke from the grill and the sugary frosting of the three-tiered cake at the center of the yard. The air hung thick with it, warm and damp in that southern way that makes a shirt cling to your back even before sunset. I stepped through the gate and saw a long stretch of tables draped in pastel linens, balloons bobbing in the breeze, and a line of smiling faces, all turned toward Sable as she posed for photos. It was her show through and through. My seat, however, was a solitary folding chair, wedged near a patch of ornamental shrubs so far from the cake table, it felt like I'd been placed there deliberately to keep the main event out of my reach. I glanced at the bottle of wine I'd brought wrapped in plain brown paper, along with a small box tied in a simple blue ribbon. I had hoped they'd be placed on the gift table by the cake, where the other offerings glimmered under the string lights, but a young man I didn't know slid them onto a side bench near the fence, instead the way you'd set down a stack of spare napkins. Sable caught my eye across the yard and gave a tight, polite smile, one she quickly turned into a bright grin as she pivoted to her friends. To them, I might as well have been another vendor, someone who delivered something and stayed out of the way while the real party happened. I sank into the chair, the metal cold against my back, and tried to let the hum of chatter wash over me. The music was light, some soft country tune about summer and fireflies, and the string lights above swayed with the occasional gust of breeze. My eyes tracked Marshall as he moved through the yard, topping off glasses, exchanging handshakes, and offering distracted nods in my direction, without ever meeting my gaze. His shoulders were tight, his jaw set in that way I remembered from his teenage years when he used to retreat to his room after one of our arguments. Only now his loyalty was split, not between father and adolescent pride, but between me and the woman gliding through her guests, as if nothing in the world could disturb her poise. I caught snippets of Sable's voice as she mingled near the tables, her laughter ringing just a touch louder than the music. "We handle every detail start to finish," she said to a pair of PTA mothers, sweeping her arm toward the balloon arch as if she'd conjured it from thin air. "Our events always leave a lasting impression. Just look at today." Her friends nodded, one of them murmuring something about how professional the setup looked. Not a mention of who had actually paid for the caterers, the rentals, or the decor. I kept my face neutral, watching a child toddle past, with a cupcake smeared across his cheeks, his laughter cutting briefly through the more practiced sounds of adult conversation. My hand drifted to the inside of my jacket, where the folder rested. The paper edges pressed lightly against my ribs, a quiet reassurance that I wasn't as invisible as they wanted me to feel. I didn't plan to use it tonight. God knows I didn't want to turn a 1-year-old's birthday into a showdown, but its presence steadied me. The thought that I had something tangible, something undeniable, was a comfort in the midst of so many carefully curated smiles. I looked down at Vera's watch under my cuff the leather strap cracked from years of wear. Each tick was louder here somehow, as if it were trying to keep me anchored while the conversations and laughter swelled around me. Marshall passed by with a pitcher of sweet tea, pausing only long enough to ask if I needed a refill. I shook my head, offering a smile I didn't entirely feel. He gave a quick nod and moved on, his eyes fixed anywhere but mine. I couldn't tell if he was avoiding my gaze out of discomfort or simply because he was too busy playing host to everyone else. Either way, the distance between us felt wider than the stretch of manicured lawn separating my chair from the center table. The sun had dipped below the tree line by the time Sable finally drifted near me, a perfect hostess still in motion. She leaned in slightly as she passed her perfume sweet and sharp like citrus and whispered, "Just don't start your old man stories, please. Keep things smooth." She didn't wait for a response, gliding back to her friends with a smile, as if nothing had passed between us. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I had no intention of boring anyone with tales from my inspection days or the nights Vera and I spent at local fairs. But hearing her say it, hearing the condescension laced in every syllable, lit a small fire in my chest. I took a deep breath, slow and deliberate, and let it out through my nose. The music picked up a bit as someone adjusted the speaker, a faint buzz crackling through the humid air, before the melody smoothed out again. I focused on the faint ticking beneath my cuff, the steady rhythm of Vera's watch, letting it drown out the chatter, the laughter, and the murmured praise Sable collected like party favors. The night wasn't over, and neither was my patience, but I could feel the weight of the folder, the muted pulse of my late wife's gift, and the slow build of something I couldn't quite name rising beneath it all. The voices from the backyard had started to melt together into a single grating hum, every laugh and clink of a glass landing like an itch I couldn't scratch. I slipped through the sliding door and stepped onto the back porch, breathing in. A current of jasmine carried on the warm night air. Out here, the noise faded to a distant buzz, replaced by the rise and fall of cicadas in the trees beyond the fence. The boards beneath my feet creaked as I lowered myself into a wicker chair, careful not to spill the coffee sloshing gently in the chipped ceramic mug I held. The handle was wrapped in a strip of yellow tape to keep it from splitting, and I couldn't help staring at it, thinking how the mug felt a little too much like me, still functional, but held together by patches and habit, more than anything solid. The yard stretched out below, glowing in soft pools of light from the string bulbs Marshall had hung earlier. From here, I could see the silhouettes of guests, moving, laughing, unaware or unconcerned that I had drifted to the edges of the evening. The cicadas grew louder as if filling the quiet that hung around me. The mug trembled in my hand, not from the heat of the coffee, but from a faint tension I'd been pretending wasn't there since Vera passed in 2018. The weight of these last years pressed against me heavier than the folder resting on the bench at my side. The same folder that held every receipt and record tying me to this house and this night. The porch door clicked softly, and Eudora Clay appeared balancing a plate with a generous slice of peach pie and a fork set neatly at its edge. At 58, she had a calmness about her that most people half her age would have killed for. She wore a faded blouse, hair tucked back, her posture relaxed, as though the chaos of the party didn't exist. Without a word, she set the plate on the small table between us, the warm scent of peaches and cinnamon curling through the humid air. Her eyes met mine, steady and knowing, as she eased into the chair across from me. "How long?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying just enough steel to cut through the cicadas. "Are you going to let them treat you like the hired help?" The question hung between us like the low-hanging branches of the magnolia tree beyond the porch. I stared down into my coffee, the surface dark and still, the chipped handle pressing into my knuckles. The words I'd been holding back since Vera's funeral finally made their way out rough around the edges. "Since she died," I said slowly, "I've been tolerated, not included. I helped pay for their life for this house for tonight, and all I get is a nod if I'm lucky. I can't even tell if Marshall sees it, or if it's easier for him to ignore." The cicadas swelled again as if punctuating the admission I'd avoided making aloud. I traced the yellow tape with my thumb, feeling how close the ceramic was to giving way. Eudora didn't speak right away. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, eyes never leaving mine. "I know the feeling," she said finally. "Back when I chaired the church committee, the donors tried to silence me. They wanted the appearance of control, to treat me like a secretary. Even as I kept the place afloat, I had to remind them who kept the lights on quietly, firmly, without a tantrum. Otherwise, I'd still be fetching coffee for men who didn't know how to balance the budget." She reached for the fork, took a small bite of the pie, and set it down carefully, the fork's tines glinting in the porch light. "You can stay invisible, Clifton, or you can remind them who built all this, but you can't do both." The cicadas softened for a moment, the night air settling into a rhythm with the distant sounds of laughter from the yard. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly, though the knot in my chest stayed put. Eudora's eyes softened, and she leaned closer, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but grounding, her voice low and certain. "If you don't remind them who built this," she said, each word measured, "they'll never see you." The jasmine scent deepened as the breeze shifted, carrying the faint strains of a country song from the backyard. Her hand lingered for a moment before she drew back, folding her own chipped mug between her palms. I sat there for a long beat, letting her words sink in, the cicadas filling the silence that followed. The chipped mug felt warm now, the coffee cooling slowly, its bitterness clinging to the back of my tongue. I set it on the railing and glanced at the bench beside me. The folder was there, edges crisp under the faint glow of the porch light. My hand hovered over it, fingers grazing the fabric of my jacket where it lay beneath. I could feel the sharp corners through the thin cloth, a reminder of what I carried, what I could use if I had to. The voices in the yard rose again, punctuated by a burst of laughter that cut briefly through the summer night. I turned back toward the yard, watching shadows dance across the lawn, their movements distant and detached from where I sat. The cicadas swelled once more, a slow pulsing chorus, as I drew my hand back and wrapped it around the warm mug again. The chipped handle dug gently into my palm, and I breathed in the jasmine and pie, holding on to the quiet of the porch for as long as it would last. When I finally looked back at the bench, the folder was still there, its presence steady, undeniable, like a question waiting for an answer I hadn't decided to give just yet. Laughter rose from the cluster of guests near the cake, a sharp and sudden swell that sliced through the lazy drone of cicadas and the faint hum of music. I caught Sable's voice cutting clear above the rest, her tone lilting with practiced humor as she quipped, "Oh, don't mind him. Our family's antique, always watching, but never saying much." The chuckles that followed from two PTA mothers, tight, polite, but real, landed like a punch I couldn't roll with. Their silhouettes flickered beneath the swaying string lights, heads tilting toward her, as if they were admiring the perfect hostess, and not the woman who'd just reduced me to a prop for her performance. The words burrowed deeper than they should have, settling somewhere behind my ribs, where irritation smoldered, fanned by the lingering smell of hickory smoke and sugar-heavy air. My hand slipped instinctively into my jacket. The folder was there, a familiar anchor against my side. I felt the bent corner press into my palm and found the smudge of grease with my fingertips tacky even now. It wasn't just paper anymore. The folder itself bore the marks of the evening crease stained, a little like the pride I'd been trying to hold on to. The warmth from my own hand had dampened the edges of the documents inside, the ink totals and signatures softening beneath my grip. Each breath drew in more of that heavy mix of smoked meat and candle wax scents that now felt less like celebration and more like the air before a summer storm. The lights hanging across the yard flickered gently in the breeze, casting soft pools of yellow across the patchy lawn. In those circles of light, the guests were shadows, laughing, sipping, oblivious. A pair of women near the drinks table caught my attention, their voices low, but not low enough. I heard Sable's juggling credit cards to keep this business afloat. One whispered her words, rolling smooth and gossipy. "This party's more ad than celebration. If she lands those PTA contracts, maybe she digs out." The other woman hummed, eyes flicking toward the dessert table where Sable's curated smile glowed beneath the bulbs. They didn't see me watching, didn't notice the way my fingers tapped lightly against the folder's edge, keeping time with the steady ticking of the watch beneath my cuff. Sable swept past me a moment later, her perfume slicing through the heavier scents, light and citrusy. Her smile didn't falter. Not for the guests, Not even for me, though. Her eyes caught mine for the briefest moment. There was nothing in them, not recognition, not annoyance, not even the faintest apology. She didn't slow her stride, didn't miss a beat in her monologue about seasonal florals and package deals, just glided on like I was another piece of patio furniture, filling the space. I felt my jaw tighten, my grip on the folder adjusting as if it were part of my own arm now. For months, maybe years, I had told myself this was just her way that I could let it slide, because Marshall seemed content to orbit her bright little sun. But standing there in that mix of laughter and faint whispers of her debts, I realized that every quiet nod, every polite dismissal had piled into something too heavy to ignore. The chair beneath me groaned as I pushed back from it, the metal legs scraping hard against the wooden deck. The sound cracked through the night sharp enough to make heads turn. Conversations faltered, glasses paused midair, and the soft strum of music from the speakers seemed suddenly louder in the new silence. I rose slowly, straightening my jacket. My fingers still curled around the folder like it might slip away if I didn't hold tight. My watch ticked each click, falling into rhythm with my pulse, the steady beat of a countdown I hadn't realized I was keeping all evening. For a moment, I just stood there, the weight of every glance brushing against me. Marshall's uncertain eyes from across the yard, Sable's quick flick of her gaze, before turning back to her admirers, the unspoken questions from the guests, now wondering why the antique had decided to move. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead, casting my shadow long across the deck, stretched thin and wavering like smoke. I didn't say a word. Words would have cheapened it. Instead, I slid the folder more firmly under my arm, adjusted my jacket, and turned toward the house. The scent of hickory and charred sugar clung to my clothes. As I stepped off the deck, the murmurs behind me swelling as quickly as the laughter had earlier. The kitchen door loomed ahead, lit dimly by the amber glow spilling from within. Each step toward it felt deliberate, heavier, the night air dense and warm against my skin. Behind me, the music wavered, and someone let out a nervous chuckle too thin to carry. I reached the door, my hand brushing the cool metal of the handle. The tick of Vera's watch pulsed through the silence, matching the steady thud of my heart. Without looking back, without giving anyone a chance to read my face, I pulled the door open and stepped inside, the weight of the folder pressed tight to my ribs. The laughter outside picked up again, softer this time, but it no longer reached me. The kitchen was cool and quiet, a thin hum from the fridge filling the space as I let the door click shut behind me. The watch on my wrist kept ticking, each sound like another second shaved off the time. Left before something inevitable broke. I stepped back onto the patio, just as Sable lifted her champagne flute toward the crowd. The string lights above swayed gently in the humid night air, casting shifting halos over the lawn. Her voice carried effortlessly smooth and bright. To family, she declared her smile perfectly timed. Then with a tilt of her head and a smirk that didn't quite meet her eyes, she added, "And to our quiet type over there, who just eats his cake and disappears." Laughter fluttered through the guests like a rehearsed chorus, polite and shallow, but enough to prick at the already thin layer of patience I'd been holding on to. I felt the wristwatch under my cuff grow heavier, its steady tick sinking into my pulse, each beat louder than the next. My fingers found the folder inside my jacket, the edges firm beneath the fabric. The paper was still creased, the faint tack of grease on the cover, catching against the lining of my coat. Every minute I'd spent in the shadows tonight had led to this, and I felt the decision crystallize as I looked around the yard. Crickets droned softly in the grass, filling the spaces between uneasy laughs. The air smelled of smoke and fading frosting, a sweetness that had turned stale over the past hours. I straightened my jacket, took a slow breath, and stepped toward the picnic table at the center of it all. The conversation stilled before I even reached it. A few heads turned puzzled as I pulled the folder free. The yellow glow of the string lights caught on its creased cover, the smudge of BBQ grease dark against the paper. I set it down on the weathered wood with a muted thud, flipping it open, so the invoices, property documents, and signatures were plain for anyone looking. The papers rustled faintly in the breeze, a soft, dry whisper against the brittle quiet that had settled over the yard. I rested one hand on the folder, the other at my side, and let my voice cut through the stillness. I paid for tonight, I said, each word deliberate, steady. The catering, the rentals, the extras. And I've been paying on this house for longer than most of you have known us. Not because I wanted a pat on the back. Not because I needed applause. Just for the simple expectation of respect. The word hung there like smoke curling into the warm air. Somewhere beyond the fence, a cricket trilled louder, as if filling the gap left by the sudden silence. The ripple started slow whispers between two women near the drinks table, a muttered, "I told you about the debts," from a man half hidden in the shadows. I could see glances shifting towards Sable, who stood stiff beside the dessert table, her smile frozen mid-curve. Her champagne glass trembled, the pale liquid inside trembling with it. Her eyes darted to Marshall, searching for a lifeline, but he just stared at me wide-eyed and silent, his hands gripping the back of a chair as though anchoring himself to something solid. Around us, the guests shifted their weight, uncertain whether to look at me, at her, or down at their plates. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. All I've wanted, I continued, is to be treated like more than a name on the checks. If I'm just a burden, if I'm just some relic to prop in a corner while the photos are taken, then maybe I should stop footing the bills that keep all this standing. The murmurs swelled low and uneasy, carrying through the night air like the first rumble of thunder before a storm. I closed the folder with a soft final snap, the sound somehow louder than the scattered whispers. Sable's face barely moved, but the tension was clear in the rigid line of her jaw, and the way her knuckles whitened around the stem of her glass. The glow from the string lights caught the sheen of moisture in her eyes. A glimmer quickly blinked away before anyone else could notice. Marshall didn't speak, his mouth half open, as if searching for words he couldn't find. The brittle silence that followed felt poised to crack every breath from the surrounding guests, a weight against the humid air. I slid the folder back under my arm, its edges digging lightly into my side, and looked around the circle of faces. "I'm not asking for applause," I said quietly, my tone calm but unyielding. "Just acknowledgement. And if that's too much, well..." I let the words hang, my eyes sweeping from Sable to Marshall and back. "Maybe it's time I stop signing the checks." The words landed heavy, a dull thud that lingered in the still air. Somewhere behind me, a guest cleared their throat, the small sound loud in the vacuum, left by all the unsaid things. The crickets outside the yard fence kept their rhythm, an indifferent chorus to the tension coiling in the glow of the patio. I felt the weight of Vera's watch again, each tick reminding me of the line I'd just drawn. The smell of smoke clung to my clothes, sweet and acrid all at once, as I took a step back from the table. No one moved. No one spoke. I turned slightly toward the house, the folder firm against my ribs, the warm night pressing down like a hand on my shoulder. "If I'm just a burden," I murmured, not loud, but enough for them to hear, "then maybe it's time I stop footing the bills." I walked toward the porch, each footstep measured the brittle quiet behind me, broken only by the faint scrape of a chair as someone shifted uneasily. The string lights swayed again in the breeze, casting brief shadows across the deck, as I stepped inside, the soft tick of my watch matching the beat of my pulse, each one counting down to whatever came next. The last of the guests had gone, their chatter fading down the street like a receding tide. The string lights in the yard still swayed gently, their glow paling against the heavy darkness that had finally settled over the neighborhood. From where I stood on the porch, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the whole evening were pressing down, demanding a reckoning. The cicadas, which had been a constant chorus all night, had quieted, replaced by the low hum of a street lamp near the driveway. It buzzed and flickered faintly, casting a weak halo over Marshall's SUV, where I saw a single pale balloon tied to Emma's car seat, its ribbon dancing softly in the warm breeze. That balloon, absurdly cheerful in the stillness, drew my eye like a warning flag, a reminder that whatever happened next, a child's world would feel the shock. Sable's voice cut through the night like a blade, sharp and deliberate, her tone too loud for the hour. And the silence around us. "You need to choose Marshall," she said, every word clipped. "It's me and Emma, or your father, who just humiliated us in front of everyone we know." Her figure stood rigid beside the car. Shoulders squared, her dress shifting slightly in the breeze, as if even the air couldn't settle near her. Marshall stood across from her, still in his rolled-up sleeves, his posture sagging beneath the weight of the decision she'd just dropped on him. His head bowed slightly, and I could see his jaw working the way it always did when he was grinding down words he couldn't yet form. I stayed back in the shadow of the porch, my hand resting on the railing. The wood was warm from the day's heat, but my fingers felt cold against it, as if my body couldn't decide whether to hold tension or surrender. I wanted to step forward to tell Sable to take a breath, to tell Marshall he didn't need to choose not like this. But my feet stayed planted. The folder under my arm felt like a weight I hadn't put down, even though it was back on the hall table now. My pulse matched the steady tick of Vera's watch beneath my cuff. Every beat a small hammer tapping against my chest, a metronome counting down to the fracture I'd set in motion hours ago. Marshall didn't speak, and Sable's impatience grew sharp enough to taste in the air. "He embarrassed us, Marshall," she pressed, her voice dropping lower, but no less pointed. "Do you understand what that does to my business, to our reputation? You can't have both. It's him or me. Us." The balloon behind her bobbed with the gust of a passing car, its shadow twitching along the driveway. Marshall's shoulders slumped, the tension rolling through his frame like a wave. He still didn't answer. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, fingers curling into fists, and then relaxing again over and over, as if he was testing the weight of both choices without ever finding balance. Finally, Sable opened the SUV's door with a decisive pull, the faint interior light spilling across the gravel. She lifted Emma's carrier seat into place, careful despite her clipped movements, and slid into the driver's seat without another glance at Marshall. The balloon's ribbon fluttered wildly for a moment as the car door shut, then stilled in the humid air. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel echoed loud and long as she backed down the driveway, the red glow of her taillights vanishing slowly into the darkness beyond the street lamp's halo. The quiet that followed was heavy enough to make the soft hum of the lamp sound like a roar. Marshall didn't move at first. He stood there at the end of the driveway, jaw tight, hands still shaking, his eyes fixed on the empty stretch of road where the SUV had disappeared. His figure looked smaller than I'd ever seen it, his back to me, his frame somehow diminished without the constant orbit of Sable and the child. The breeze rustled through the oak leaves, scattering a few across the lawn, and still he didn't turn. I finally stepped down from the porch, the wood creaking beneath my shoes, and approached slowly, not wanting to break the silence too abruptly. When I stopped beside him, I didn't reach for his shoulder or speak right away. The night itself seemed to demand quiet, as if words would only make the fracture deeper. We stood together in that stillness, the cicadas starting to hum again, far off their slow pulsing rhythm, a fragile counterpoint to the street lamp's buzz. My own breath felt too loud, and when I glanced at Marshall's profile, I saw the glint of moisture in his eyes, though he blinked it away quickly. I finally broke the silence, my voice low enough to barely carry. "I suppose I've won." I said the words tasting bitter the moment they left my mouth, but I might have just destroyed the home I've been paying to keep alive. Marshall didn't answer, just exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping a fraction, as if the admission had taken some weight off both of us, though not enough to ease the heaviness entirely. The balloon's ribbon, still tied to the empty car seat, drifted lazily in the breeze, a ghostly reminder of what had just driven away. I turned my gaze toward the sky where the stars were faint and few through the humid haze. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, each click sharp in the thick silence, each one marking another second of what now felt like loss instead of victory. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat and whispered just loud enough for the night to hold it. "Vera, is this the price for dignity?" The words drifted up with the hum of the street lamp, mingling with the faint chorus of the cicadas. While Marshall stood beside me, unmoving, as if neither of us yet knew what we'd set in motion or how to stop it now. The house felt twice as big without Emma's giggles bouncing off the walls. The faint creak of the floorboards under my socks sounded louder than usual, and every small sound the chime of the grandfather clock in the hall. The soft hum of the fridge seemed to emphasize just how empty the place had become. The morning light filtered in through the sheer curtains, casting soft, shifting squares across the tiled floor. Outside, I could just make out the faint rise and fall of a church choir, rehearsing down the street, their voices carried thinly on the humid air, through an open window somewhere nearby. It was the kind of sound Vera would have paused to listen to, a hand on my arm, eyes closed. I lingered by the counter, not for the first time, staring at the battered folder that had caused so much strain. A yellow sticky note stuck out near the top, marked in my own neat handwriting, total paid to date, $84,000. I ran my thumb along the edge of the folder. The paper inside was pressed flat now, no creases, no smudges, no residue of grease. I'd sat up the night before methodically cleaning it, smoothing corners, even sliding each page into clear sleeves. The thing felt neutral now. Not a weapon, not leverage, just records, a history of effort and sacrifice. I caught my reflection faintly in the stainless steel fridge door. Hair sticking up at odd angles. Eyes ringed with fatigue, but a calm there that hadn't been present in days. The doorbell rang, breaking the quiet, and I pushed away from the counter, the low notes of the choir outside, rising faintly as if underscoring the moment. Eudora stood on the porch, a basket balanced on her hip, the warm buttery scent of biscuits escaping through the weave before she even spoke. "Thought you could use breakfast," she said, her voice as steady and grounding as it had been on the porch a few nights ago. I stepped aside to let her in, the faintest hint of jasmine from her perfume, mingling with the biscuit's aroma. Marshall was already at the kitchen table, staring absently at a mug of coffee gone cold. His eyes flicked up, acknowledging Eudora with a tired nod, before settling back on the tabletop. The three of us moved with care, as though the air in the house might shatter if handled too roughly. Eudora set the basket down, pulling out a plate and sliding 2 biscuits toward Marshall. She sat, folded her hands around a cup I handed her, and finally broke the silence. "That folder," she said, nodding to where it rested on the counter, "it's been a hammer long enough. Maybe it's time it became something else. Something that builds, not breaks." Her gaze shifted between us, the quiet weight of her words settling like sunlight across the kitchen. I glanced at Marshall, whose jaw tightened, not in anger, but in some mix of guilt and uncertainty. He nodded faintly, not looking at me, as if silently asking what I planned to do with the burden I'd been carrying. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, the faint warmth of the biscuits drifting up between us. "I've been thinking," I began, slowly choosing my words the way I used to choose which reports to sign off on. "I want to use what I've put in the money, the title, to start a scholarship fund at the church, in Vera's name, for kids in town who could use a break, maybe to help them get to college or trade school, something that means more than these arguments." I let the thought settle in the still air, the faint notes of the choir seeping in through the window, as if to punctuate the shift in tone. Marshall's eyes lifted, red-rimmed but focused, and for the first time in days, his face softened. Relief flickered across his expression, his shoulders sinking slightly, as though a weight had shifted from him to the room itself. "She'd like that," he said quietly, his voice rough. He cleared his throat, blinked once, and added, I still hope Sable comes back, Dad. For Emma, if nothing else." His fingers closed around the edge of the plate, knuckles white, but his face didn't harden. There was a tremor in his voice, but not of anger. Something closer to hope trying to find a foothold. I rose from my chair and crossed to the counter, picking up the folder. It felt different in my hands now, lighter somehow. I carried it back to the table and set it in front of Marshall. "Then this," I said, tapping the clean cover can. "Help us make something good, whether she does or not. It doesn't have to be a wedge anymore." He looked down at it, his thumb brushing the yellow sticky note, and nodded, swallowing hard before meeting my gaze. There was no argument, no resentment there now, just a quiet understanding, fragile but real. The clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, soft and deliberate, and I took it as my cue. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door click shut behind me. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of jasmine drifting from the hedges by the steps. I drew in a slow breath, the faint voices of the choir still carrying on the breeze. The sunlight was softer now, filtered through a veil of humidity that made the whole street seem suspended in some gentle haze. I let the quiet hold me for a moment, my hand brushing lightly over Vera's watch as I murmured into the breeze, "Maybe this house can mean more than a battleground." The words slipped away into the morning air, soft as the jasmine carried off toward the faint echo of hymns drifting down the street. The church hall glowed with the soft amber of late afternoons, sunlight pouring through the tall windows and pooling across the polished wood floor. The air smelled faintly of apple pie remnants of a bake sale, lingering like a sweet punctuation to the day. Outside, through the open double doors, maple leaves skittered across the parking lot in little gusts, their reds and oranges flickering like sparks against the gray pavement. I stood at the podium, fingers brushing the edge of the microphone, Marshall just a step behind me, his presence steady. In the front row, Eudora sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap. Her quiet smile aimed my way, not as a cheerleader, but as someone who understood the winding path that had led me here. In my breast pocket, Vera's watch ticked a steady, muted rhythm I could feel more than hear. That subtle weight pressed close to my heart grounded me as I cleared my throat and looked out over the small gathering. Faces from the congregation people I'd known for years, and some I barely recognized, watched patiently, murmurs fading as I began to speak. For most of my life, I said my voice, even I thought of burden and blessing as two separate things. You either carried weight or you shared joy. But sometimes, if you're patient, if you're willing to bend without breaking those burdens, can become bridges. My gaze drifted briefly to the side, where the freshly printed placard bearing Vera's name stood against the wall, the Vera Harkness Community Fund. I let the quiet sit for a moment, letting the sunbeams stretching across the hall do as much of the speaking as I did. This fund, I continued, isn't about erasing hardship or pretending we haven't struggled. It's about turning something heavy money that once divided us papers, that once felt like weapons, into something that helps others cross their own rough patches. For young families in Greenville, for kids trying to take their first real step forward, this will be here. That's what Vera would have wanted. Not fights, not grudges, bridges. The applause was gentle but genuine, the kind that fills a room without feeling forced. Marshall stepped forward and clasped my shoulder, his grip warm, his eyes a little brighter than they'd been in weeks. He leaned in close enough that only I could hear. "Emma will know Dad," he murmured. "She'll know her grandfather didn't just keep a roof over our heads, he built something that lasts." His voice caught for a second, but he smiled, a small, fragile thing that felt more real than any I'd seen from him since the night Sable drove away. As the crowd began to mingle, offering handshakes and warm words, my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I slipped it free, expecting another message from Eudora or one of the church deacons. Instead, it was from Sable. No text, no explanation, just a photo. Emma, chubby fingers clutching the string of a bright balloon, her wide eyes turned up toward the sky. The edges of the balloon glowed where the late sun hit it, a halo of color against the pale backdrop of a fall afternoon. My throat tightened unexpectedly, and I blinked against the sudden sting in my eyes. The corners of my mouth pulled into a slow smile, not triumphant, not wistful. Just a quiet acknowledgement that maybe not all the threads had frayed beyond repair. The reception wound down as the sun began its descent. The last slices of pie disappearing from the bake sale table. The murmurs of gratitude fading as people drifted back to their lives. I stepped outside, the cool autumn air brushing against my face, the scent of leaves and pie still hanging faintly as the day shifted toward evening. The parking lot was mostly empty now, save for a few cars and the trail of leaves gathering in the corners. I paused at the edge of the lot, watching the horizon as the sky deepened into gold and then purple, the colors washing over the clouds like brushstrokes on a fading canvas. My hand instinctively found the watch through the fabric of my jacket. Its steady ticking was almost lost beneath the rustle of the wind, but I could still feel it, each beat a quiet anchor in the cooling air. I looked at the sky and let the tension of the past months loosen from my shoulders, the weight of arguments, ultimatums, and silent dinners, giving way to something softer. "Vera," I whispered into the breeze, my breath visible in the cooling air. Maybe we didn't lose everything after all. The leaves skittered along the pavement behind me, the last rays of sunlight slipping beneath the horizon, and I stood there until the colors bled into dusk, letting the hum of the world settle into something that finally felt like peace. The last light of the day caught on Vera's old watch in my pocket. its steady tick now a comfort instead of a weight. Watching the maple leaves dance outside the church, I realized the battles and the silence had given way to something bigger: peace and a future worth handing to Emma. Sometimes bridges have to sway and strain before we see which ones can still carry us. Even when family ties fray, we can stitch new meaning into what remains, turning ledgers and receipts into legacies. Has life ever surprised you with a second chance hidden in a hard season? Share your story below. I'd like to hear how you found your bridge.